Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Talking Tradesman. With me in the studio today, I've got Andy Williams, who is the author of the book you can see in front of you in the table there, Beyond the Drop Zone. Couple of things. First of all, this is the first episode in what is the new Talking Tradesman studio, and fitting for the occasion, we've got a very special guest in Andy. So first of all, mate, thank you very much for giving up your time to come and talk to me today. Let's talk.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honour to be the first guest in the new studio. So
Yeah, it's worked out well, mate. It's worked out well. So any technical difficulties, don't shoot me. This is all new in here now. But so Andy is obviously an author. His story is well worth reading or listening to. So I've actually listened to Andy's book on Audible because that's, podcasts and audiobooks are my thing. It's an incredible book, genuinely fantastic listen. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a hard hitter. Obviously, it discusses Andy's life. Andy is a former paratrooper who's served several tours of active duty. Well worth a listen. Go buy it. Go check it out. Go download it, whichever way you prefer. But go and check it out. Obviously, you'll get to know a little bit about Andy in this episode and why he wrote the book and what he's been through to get there. So, as before with the previous guest, Nick Dunn, being ex-forces, I think you guys, your stories just generally show, I guess, the extreme end of mental resilience and also the sort of impact of trauma. Because the stuff you guys go through is obviously, it's quite hard to compare. Me sat here now, been in the building trades my whole life. There's a lot of what you're going to talk about, a lot of what you've been through that I just can't resonate with because, those environments, those extreme pressure environments that you guys have been in, it's quite hard for, how can I put it, a civilian to, really understand how that was in that moment. But I guess the best we can do is sort of try and imagine. So I guess as with any story, Andy, it's got a beginning, mate. Let's go back to your beginning and sort of, I guess, what led you to begin with? What led you into the paras?
Yeah, so just going back to what you were saying, I do really appreciate you giving the likes of myself and Nick a platform to talk about our experiences in the military. And what I've come to realise is that, as you all well know, mental health doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter whether you're a veteran, you're in the building trade or any other industry. It's equally as crippling and different. But no, I do generally appreciate you giving me a platform to sort of talk to your listeners more about it.
It's an honour, mate. It truly is an honour to have you sat there. And what you said is perfect because mental health does have no boundaries. It doesn't matter if you're in the building trades, the forces, you work at Tesco's, it doesn't have any boundaries. We all have our different trigger points and different traumas that we have to negotiate, but mental health affects absolutely everybody. And I think one of the biggest problems with mental health, because mental health in the UK at the moment, I would say, is a crisis. It's a pandemic of mental health, if you like. And there's still that overarching stigma, particularly amongst men, that it's a weakness. That it's weak to talk about it. It's weak to be affected by it. But when you've got people like yourself that have, if you were going to sort of categorize alpha male in terms of your history, you're the embodiment of that. And if you've been through things and it's affected you, then I think what that does is it illustrates to everybody, do you know what, if it can affect him, it can affect anyone.
Yeah, and that was really the motivation behind writing the book. Just for me, all this means nothing, but if the book will help one person be vulnerable and reach out, then it's been worth it for me, because along with a lot of the guys I serve with, there's a growing number of lads that have taken their lives since some of the tours that we went on.
Yeah.
And I just feel really strongly that shouldn't be happening. You shouldn't be sort of giving so many of your younger years to service, coming out into the civilian world without the tools to deal with some of the experiences that you have, or without a a support network, and and so I just think platforms like this, it's important to be vulnerable. It should be viewed as a strength, not a weakness. And like I say, if it helps one person, then it's all been worth it for me.
I agree with you 110%, mate. It's a very noble thing you doing it for that cause as well. So I thank you for doing your part. And 100%, mate. It's these conversations, these stories, it will resonate with somebody. And even if they can't resonate directly with what you've been through, there will be an experience that they can equate it to. And talking about where you've been and then coming out the other side, I think that really provides inspiration to a lot of people that are struggling. So all credit, mate. It's a very noble thing, and it needs more people like you, more platforms like this, to be talking about these and having these open conversations about mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So going back to your original question, so I joined the Paras at 16. I grew up in North Wales, a small seaside town in North Wales called Prestatyn.
Okay.
And I had really somewhat of an unorthodox childhood when I think back. So we only had a very small family, and my father has always worked overseas, away from home. I've never actually lived with him. It's always been a distant relationship. And I've got two older siblings. My brother is about 14 or 15 years older than me. My sister's 12 years older than me. And so we lived in Prestatyn, and at a young age, my mother was an alcoholic. Essentially, there's no other way of putting it. And all the memories that I had of her when I was a child are not very nice ones. So when I was very young, when I was probably about 2 or 3, my mother decided to abandon us, and she just one day left the house and never came back. And so at that time, my older brother just left to join the Royal Marines. So it left my sister and myself alone in the house, and my sister was like 14 at the time. So it was decided that the best thing to do was for us to relocate to Saudi Arabia, which is where my dad was living and working.
Nice.
And up until that point, we would just see him maybe once a year. There wasn't a great deal of work in the small towns and villages in North Wales when my dad was growing up. All my dad's side worked down the pits as miners. And that's what he did when he left school, and then he eventually went into the Merchant Navy, became an engineer, and that's what led him to working overseas, where it was a really good career, really. And previously to me being born, my brother and my sister lived in Malaysia with my dad, other parts of the Far East. And so when my mother abandoned us, we went to live in Saudi, and we were only there a couple of years. My sister was really young, and I do have some memories of being in Saudi in them early years, but I was still very young. And we lived on what was a western compound in the middle of the Saudi Arabian desert, and my dad worked on ethylene plants outside a city called Al Jubail. And so we would just spend the time in the compound. There was an outdoor pool there. There was a video rental shop and a small restaurant. And we lived there with all the other Westerners, really, that worked on the ethylene plants from America and Canada and the UK mostly. Yeah. And then after a few years, my sister got to an age where she was 16 going on 17, and she just missed being in the UK. And it's understandable, really, because she was at that age where we didn't really have any friends over there. There weren't that many kids, and I was getting to an age where I was looking at going into an international school. And so my sister persuaded my dad for us to move back to the UK, for my sister and I to move back to the UK. And she convinced my dad that, I will look after Andrew. I'll bring him up as one of my own. And she was only 16 at the time.
Wow.
So it's obviously a big decision to make, but anybody that knows my sister will know that she's a fiercely strong-willed, independent person. And so my dad agreed, and we moved back to Prestatyn. And my dad's mother had my dad had bought a flat off his mother. It was an old council flat, and so we just decided that my sister and I were going to live there. And yeah, it was tough. I think that it was an overwhelming experience for my sister at such a young age. I don't think she really appreciated that what the sort of the toll it was going to take on her. And I still went out to Saudi. I used to go out every year, so I'd visit my dad for all of the summer holidays, and I'd often miss the first few weeks of school as well. And we'd go out there, and it was just one big adventure, really, being on the compound, and it was a really good experience as a young kid. I just saw it as a big adventure. And Saudi at that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, it was a very strict country to live in. I mean, they still had public executions in the cities going on. Not that I ever witnessed any, but you'd see the crowds of people in the city. So it was an amazing experience. And so I lived with my sister in the flat, and then after a few years, when my sister was 18, she actually met someone as well, and got married young. And we moved out of the flat into an estate nearby in the same town. And she did everything she could for me, but thinking back, I always had this sense of not feeling like I was wanted, because my sister and I weren't affectionate. So, we never hugged or told each other we loved each other. I always felt like I was in the way, that I wasn't really wanted.
Yeah.
And it was hard to understand at a young age why I didn't have a family. I didn't understand why my mum didn't want me, didn't live with my dad.
To be fair, mate, not that I'm a psychologist as much as I've studied it, but there's two clear sets of abandonment, really, isn't there? Obviously your mum and your dad as well, to a degree, going and working where he went to work. I'm sure he had his reasons, but there's the parental abandonment almost from both sides there for you.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the reason I'm saying that is I think it's really important, because I've been through stuff myself in a similar sort of, not the same, but similar abandonments from parents. I think it's really important to recognise your sort of like early traumas and triggers, because it then impacts your adult life.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It plays out on how you act, how the things that you lean towards as you get older, so often are a result of what's happened to you at those key like developmental years, which by the sounds of it, I'm sat here piecing it together, thinking, you've got those abandonments, and then obviously you go towards the services, which then gives you that family, doesn't it?
Yeah. And I have looked into it myself. So John Balby, Mary Ainsworth, they did very famous studies, didn't they? Where with the surrogate mothers and the strange situation experiment, which are fascinating. And I didn't realize it at the time. It actually took me till a lot later in life that I sort of reflected back, and a lot of my behaviours made sense, really.
Yeah.
Because it definitely had a profound impact on me as a young kid. I didn't know it at the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're just a kid, aren't you? Although you're very resilient, I don't think you fully realise the impact that those experiences are going to have on you.
Absolutely, that, mate. Yeah, you do. As a child, I think we all just accept what's going on as normal, as extreme as it might be, but it then plays out into your adulthood. I mean, how Since you've recognised that, but just telling me that, I can tell you've done your research. But have you found that's helped you moving forwards to know? I don't think you can't fix it. Like, you can't take away that experience that you had as a kid. You will always have that experience where your mum did leave.
Yeah.
But now you can recognise where it plays out. Has it helped you?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think, knowledge is power, and I don't by any means view myself as a victim in any sense of the word, because we've all got our own traumas and stories, but it helps me understand a bit more. So I think it helps in that sense. I don't feel like my experiences are special in any way, shape or form, but they're just unique to me, and everyone's got their own story. So, but that was the overriding feeling. I just felt like I didn't really belong, and I was always embarrassed at school because school children don't understand. They don't understand why you don't live with your mum or your dad. And my sister was only 12 years older than me. So she was still figuring out a lot of her experiences as well. And I know later from what happened with my mother, she had a really tough time as well. Like I said, my mother was an alcoholic, and she was very violent as well at times. And she came back into the scene during my childhood, but I never really connected with her. She just sort of used to move around. And I remember one experience when I was in high school, and one of my best friends, Jay, and I, we just finished school, and I'd heard a rumour that she was living on an estate in the town. And I said to him just flippantly, "Oh, we'll go and knock on after school," sort of thing. I'd not seen her for a few years, and it was only like 3:00 in the afternoon at the time we finished school.
Let's pause there a moment to thank this episode's sponsors, Zinza. Have you heard of Zinza's Perma White? Perma White is tough, it's scrubbable, and it's the best mold-resistant finish to use in high-moisture areas like kitchens and bathrooms. We use this in our business all the time. It's designed to resist cracking, peeling and blistering for up to 7 years, and it can be tinted to any RAL or NCS colour on the chart that you want at selected retailers. It's water-based, it's low odour, it's easy to work with, it's quick to recoat. What more could you want in a bathroom quality and kitchen quality emulsion? If you haven't already, go and check out Zinza's Perma White. Thank you to Zinza. Let's get back to the episode.
So I went to the door, knocked on, and she opened the door. Bearing in mind it was 3:15 in the afternoon, and she was blind drunk. Her arm was in a cast, and she was just cursing and just not a nice person to be around. And I was just, in that moment, I felt so embarrassed because he's fine, Jay's fine. He knows me like a brother, but as a kid, it is a really embarrassing thing. And so there was no emotional connection, maybe unconsciously, but I didn't feel anything towards her. So I didn't really bother for making that relationship until years later. Before I deployed to Afghanistan, I decided I wanted to find her and meet her, but nothing really changed, to be honest. So I always say I don't know. I didn't know any different, but on some level, it definitely takes an impact. It has an impact on you. And so my sister and I and her husband, we lived on the estate, and she had a daughter quite young as well. So although she was my niece, I kind of viewed her as a little sister. Yeah. And the marriage didn't last very long. It was quite a violent relationship, quite explosive. And again, that took its toll on me. It sounds strange now to say, but I developed tics, and only from the research I've done now, I realised that it was through stress, extreme stress at a young age. And so, yeah, after a few years, we moved back into the flat with my niece. And my niece, we shared a bed, and my sister slept on the floor in the flat.
Wow.
We didn't, we just didn't really have much, but she did the best that she could for us.
Yeah.
Which I'm like forever grateful for, because she was just figuring things out as well.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I suppose that's where I started boxing at a young age, and without really a male role model to look up to, I found that in the gym, in the boxing gym with the coach that I had, and I enjoyed every part of it, the physical fitness, trying to find that kind of like grit and resilience, and the sparring sessions. And by the time I joined the military, I'd had half a dozen fights, and it gave me a good foundation really for fitness and and resilience, and just a bit of escapism, I suppose.
Yeah, there must have been an element of getting that frustration out as well through boxing.
Yeah,
it's hard, isn't it? Because like you say, when you're a kid, you just don't know, but there will be pent up, like you said about the ticks. It'll the stress of probably concern for your sister, concern for the situation. Yeah, you need some kind of outlet. So I think boxing for those kind of things is brilliant, isn't it? Have you carried on the boxing out of interest?
I boxed for the army, or for the parachute regiment, and then I wanted to focus more on the soldiering side. But I have a gym in the garage now, and I enjoy. Although I'm not fighting anymore, I enjoy training,
bag work,
and I think there's a lot to be said in a correlation between mental health and like a physical sport, a physical outlet.
Massive, mate. Yeah, absolutely.
So it was good. And my sister met somebody else towards the end of my secondary education, and when I was like 14, 15, she spent more and more time with this person, and I lived in the flat on my own from a young age, really. And I'd see her in passing, and she'd put food in the cupboards, but then I'd very much be left to sort of live on my own. But it actually helped me massively, because by the time I joined the army at 16, I could already cook, I could iron, polish boots, clean the house, and there were a lot of there were things that people a lot older than me couldn't do when they went into basic training. So I was very independent, really, at a young age, and as a result of that, I didn't really take school seriously. In fact, a good friend of mine and myself, we'd skip school most of the time, but rather than smoking and hanging around with the wrong kids, we would go and train. And he was training to join the Royal Marines, and I was training to join the Parachute Regiment.
Did you always know you wanted to go Parachute Regiment?
No, so I did look up to my brother, although I didn't see him that often. He'd occasionally come back on annual leave from the Royal Marines, and I was fascinated with his stories of being in the Marines, escaping North Wales, and seeing the world, really, at such a young age. And so I think I recognised, probably in primary school, that was my way out of the town and out of North Wales. And I'd have thought about this a lot, and I remember always thinking that no matter what I do, I'm going to be the best at it. I'm going to do it to the best of my ability to prove my mum and my dad, and prove everyone wrong, that I actually am worth, I'm worth something.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was obsessive. It became obsessive. We would go for like 10-mile runs on the beach at 5 o'clock in the morning. Swimming in the North Wales Sea in the winter, just mad. The more
Mate, the North Wales Sea in the summer's
I know.
bad enough, let alone the winter.
We would just create these bizarre training regimes, like running up the mountain with a rucksack full of rocks, and just the harder the better. And I just not passing the selection process just wasn't an option, and failing. So we always just to bunk off school and train really. I was so by the time I joined, I was so physically fit. I probably lost fitness in the start of the training, really? Because it's progressive and they build you up. But it was good, and I still enjoy that now. I still enjoy pushing myself to that that sort of where you just feel like you can't give any more, and just. But yeah, so I knew from a young age that's what I wanted to do, and I was going to join the Marines. That was just to be the same as my brother.
As your brother.
But when I got to 13, 14, I was in the Army Cadets. I was learning more about the armed forces, and I would obsess over these collection of books that I had and magazines. And then I decided that I didn't want to copy my brother. I wanted to sort of do my own thing, and that's when I sort of became aware of the parachute regiment, the distinctive maroon beret, and parachuting. So I just that's where I put my focus really.
I mean, that's somebody that doesn't know a lot about the armed forces. I know bits, but obviously I've got no experience of it. I've had friends that have gone in and family members that have served and all that. But I have personally have always thought of the parachute regiment as being sort of like the I guess the thrill seekers, the adrenaline, the extreme. This is the old thing, isn't there? You don't get normal people that want to jump out of a perfectly good plane. So I've always thought like, that the parachute regiment to be up there in terms of, obviously it's the elite regiment. But yeah, I've always thought, if I'm honest, mate, if I'm speaking openly here, that the people that go into the paras are a bit loopy, basically. So
for such a short history, the regiment have been involved in every major conflict that the United Kingdom's been involved with since the Second World War, and it certainly prides itself on fitness and aggression. If you're fit, you can be aggressive, you can follow orders. You'll do well. If you'll and it's outside of UK Special Forces. It is the hardest selection process in the British Army.
Okay.
And we have the Royal Marines, the counterparts, which is the Navy.
Yeah.
And that was part of the appeal, really, because it was, the hardest thing to get into.
So it was sort of like on par with your brother, but different at the same time.
Yeah, on par, but slightly more difficult.
Slightly better. Yeah. There's a chance your brother will be listening.
Yeah, possible. I know there's light hard banter between cap badges, but the Royal Marines are equally as good. It's just a different. They're more amphibious and part of the Navy. So
yeah,
and so I was dead set on joining on the parachute regiment, and there was a few old documentaries that are out that you could watch on like a video cassette, of the selection process and the book. So I studied it, obsessively before I joined in. I was aware of what I was going into, and when I went into the recruitment office, they tried to steer me in the direction of the local regiment, which was the Royal Welsh Fusiliers. But I was just set on the paras, and it's interesting because unlike the local regiments, the paras is a melting pot of people from all corners of the UK and the Commonwealth. And there's definitely trends in the kind of backgrounds of people that join, and most of the guys, not all of them, they come from rough council estates and broken homes. It's almost as if they're looking for that sense of identity, and they find that with the paras, and I often think that's why they make really good soldiers, because they've overcome some form of adversity at a young age. They're impressionable. It's definitely impressionable at that age. I know I certainly was at 16, and you're desperately craving that sense of community and a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
That you might not have in your home life, and that was everything that it gave me.
We talked about it a bit before record, didn't we? But the importance of purpose, having that purpose and giving you guys that purpose, it's so vitally important. And I think, again, we said pre-record, but like the young generation today, there's quite a lot of them that seem quite lost, purposeless. They don't really know what they're going to do or why they're going to do it. And I think that plays out into other demographics of life, really. Having a purpose is so important.
Yeah.
And that's why things like, you touched on physical exercise, but having that physical exercise element to your life and the balance within work and outside of work really plays such a huge part in mental health.
Yeah, and I do think it's one of the contributing factors why a lot of veterans will struggle with the transition from not just the paras, but their unit into the civilian world, because you lose that identity and that purpose in your life, and you've got to find out what you are outside of the regiment. You've got to reestablish a purpose and a sense of meaning, because otherwise, especially if you join at a young age, you're just completely lost.
Yeah.
When I left, because I joined at 16, I didn't even know how to pay a bill. I sort of became an adult in the army. So, I think, like you said, that sense of purpose is important.
It's got to be hard, mate, as well, because I think within the armed forces, they train you to a very high level for a very specific purpose. So, like, obviously being a soldier, being out there to fight and manage the equipment that you guys manage, and all of those incredible skills that they teach you, but then don't necessarily translate into civilian life. Like, how do you take all of those skills as somebody that's been trained to be at like special forces level? How does that translate into, okay, you're no longer doing that, or what job can I take those skills into? And still, there's got to be a level, because there's no doubting about it, mate. I mean, you sit there and say you were a paratrooper, there's a level of respect that brings. I immediately will look at you and think, fair play. Because the limited knowledge I've got, I know that you've been through selection. I know that you've been trained to such a high level to perform that role. So there's immediately a respect there. But the minute you come out, and then it's, well, what job role is really appropriate for somebody that's trained to that level? Because, I mean, I know you've obviously got experience this that we'll talk about, but you went into, obviously, private security and you took your skills into the private sector. But for people that will want to integrate, I guess, into society, like normal job roles, that's got to be really difficult.
Yeah, and I think the guys that leave, they sometimes can do themselves an injustice, because there are so many transferable skills. You just need to you need to recognize that as a skill that is needed in the business world, or whatever it is. That there are skills, but I think infantry units in particular struggle, because ultimately your bread and butter is being a soldier. Closing with and killing an enemy, that's ultimately your goal. But from like project management to just managing teams, resilience, being a leader, there's so many transferable skills. And I think that resettlement transition process back into the civilian world is crucial. Just things like writing a CV, or just finding who you are outside of the military. But yeah, it's really important. There are so many skills that that can be used, and people can do really, really well. It's just recognizing that and reestablishing your purpose.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I mean we're jumping the big portion of the story here, but when it comes to leaving the services, the armed forces, what sort of guidance is there? Do you get like a transition period where you get coached into where you can take your skills and redistribute them?
Yeah, so after your minimum 5 year service, it used to be, I'm not sure, I'm a bit out of the loop now because I left such a long time ago, you'd get a form of resettlement. So you can look at various trades and courses, and the army will give you a proportion of the money towards retraining. But outside of the actual what you're going to do for work, some of the guys don't have any homes to go back to or any family to go back to.
Yeah.
They might stay in the garrison town. I know lads from that were amazing soldiers, but they come from really rough council estates, and they can't go home because it's only going to go one way.
Yeah.
So, or they don't have any support network whatsoever outside of the army. And with the best will in the world, once you leave, the guys that are still in, they're so busy with training and operations, it's just impossible to stay in touch at a level that's really needed to give you that support, really. I mean, I'm just reconnecting with guys I served with 20 years ago.
Really?
And I'm very, very passionate about people with my background helping each other, because it was so bizarre when I left, because you go through these experiences with people that are by all accounts they're your brothers. You do anything for them, and then almost overnight you lose contact with them. And I met a good friend of mine, Nick, a few weeks ago. First time I've met him in 15 years. And it was like I spoke to him on the phone the day before, just sort of picked up where we'd left on. So I do think there's a lot of value in we can help each other.
Yeah.
We've got a support network here. So yeah, in answer to your question, there is a resettlement process, and I know especially with the paras, people seem to steer naturally towards close protection because it's just a continuation of the job you were already doing in a different environment, or physical training because you maintain a high level of fitness, and that's where I felt naturally towards close protection. And I know we've jumped a little bit here, but
jumped a big bit, mate.
Well, yeah. Well,
we'll get to the close protection. Let's go back to the paras. So, in terms of active tours, how many did you do, Andy?
So three active tours.
Where were they?
My first, I just turned 18, was to Northern Ireland. So this was the tail end of the Banner campaign, the Troubles in Northern Ireland.
Okay.
So it was a different side to soldiering that I didn't experience on any other deployment, because we were operating in an environment that was so relatable and so similar to our own, not socially or politically, but the streets, the houses, they're very similar to the places where we grew up, and a different type of soldiering in terms of riot control and public order training. So it was, like I say, it was towards the back end of the campaign. So it wasn't as active as in the decades previous, but there was still violence. There was still plenty of sectarian violence, and we found ourselves with some pretty tasty riots, marches. So it's different in a sense of it's up close and personal.
Yeah.
It's the first time of being on deployment where you think, there's people here that if they could snatch you, if they could get hold of you, you wouldn't be seen again. They outside those barrack walls, and so we helped facilitate the marching season through July, and supported the police service in Northern Ireland in maintaining an element of control throughout the marching season.
How was it for you guys? Like, did you go off barracks much, or were you allowed off barracks?
Yeah, so there was a curfew in place. We were allowed to specific areas, and then there was a map of no-go areas, and the line that marks the no-go area. I mean, it could be as basic as a street. It's you wouldn't know just to be out in Belfast.
Yeah.
But there was definitely an undercurrent of hostility, and you could see it. And where when you obviously fit a certain profile being a soldier, although you don't recognise it at that time, you stand out. So you do have to be situationally aware, observe the curfew and the no-go areas, and then we would carry out our foot patrols and we would attend the marches. And then the rest of the days were spent with training and intelligence updates. And it was good. It was only a short deployment. I think we were there for nearly 4 months. But it was. I'm glad that I got a chance to experience it, and it was an opportunity for me to integrate into the platoon that I was in, because I'd not long been. I've been in battalion. Been in 3-Para about a year at that point.
Okay.
And it was good, and the training is quite intense for it. So that was the first deployment, and then the year after I went to Iraq as part of the Telic campaign. So yeah, that was to southern Iraq. But it was quite an interesting time because the Americans had already announced their withdrawal from Iraq.
Okay.
So this had been 2005, and at that time I joined a specialist heavy machine guns platoon. So within the battalion, the makeup of the battalion, you'll have your rifle companies, which are your sort of your gravel belly soldiers. Your sort of your traditional soldiering in every sense of the word.
Yeah.
And then you'll have your specialist units. So that might be mortars, anti-tanks, signalers, snipers. And I passed the selection to go into the heavy machine guns.
What did that entail then? I take it heavy machine guns, is that vehicle mounted?
Yeah, both tripod and vehicle mounted.
Oh, okay.
So we would use the 50 caliber Browning machine gun.
Of course.
Yeah. A fascinating bit of kit.
I mean, look, mate, my knowledge of, again, weapons is minimal. It extends as far as going to a shooting range in Vegas.
Yeah.
So that's what I know about guns and weaponry. But I know I didn't fire it myself, but there was somebody firing a 50 caliber like long range rifle on the range, and Jesus Christ, it was like a cannon going off.
Yeah, so it's a powerful gun, and partly why my hearing is terrible now.
Yeah.
So yeah, the 50 cal and a general purpose machine gun mounted on a tripod. So the purpose really of the guns, we would support the assaulting companies. So we might be on the ground as a gun team. So we'd have a machine gun and a tripod, and we would give the company sustained fire support through long bursts of the machine gun. But then we'd also mount the guns onto essentially a stripped down Land Rover called a Wimmick, and 50 cal on the top, and GPMG in the commander's mount. And we just like a patrol vehicle, I suppose. Lightly armored, soft skin vehicle. Little to no protection from IEDs, but really versatile, really effective. and I decided that was where I wanted to go. I had the choice of a number of carders, but I already had a few friends in the guns platoon. Thought it's quite a cool thing to do, to carry these, fire these heavy machine guns. And every year they'll run what's called a carder. So if you want to go be a sniper, you'll do the sniper's carder, the reconnaissance platoon. And it's usually 2 or 3 months on an exercise, and you'll have to pass various selection processes along the way, including long, heavy marches carrying all the kit. So obviously the gun kit is mega heavy.
Yeah.
And then depending on the number of vacancies in the platoon, you'd be offered a position in the platoon.
So going to Iraq, was that, or did this happen in Belfast? Was that the first? There must have been a point where you shot at somebody for the first time. Where did that happen?
Yeah, well, actually, in Northern Ireland, there was no fire exchanged. We got into some quite terrifying scraps, really, where there's a few occasions where the rioters had stripped the kit off the vehicles, and they were trying to snatch some of the guys out of the crowd. But in Iraq, because of the platoon I was in, we mostly patrolled the desert, and we would monitor the southern border of Iraq and liaise with the Iraqi security forces. We didn't get into any sustained firefights during that deployment. There was a couple of occasions on the border where bursts of fire were fired across the border.
Is that the border to where?
From Iran.
Oh,
yeah.
Right, okay.
But they weren't directly targeting us. We were informed that it's a regular occurrence. Sporadic bursts of fire would pass the border, so we're strictly told, unless we are receiving accurate incoming fire, we're not to engage. So that in Iraq, in terms of conventional warfare, the biggest risk came from IEDs and mines, really.
Right.
And there were police stations and coalition forces convoys that were targeted with roadside bombs. Fortunately, I didn't get caught up in any. A few happened whilst I was there. And that was it, really, for that deployment of Iraq. I found myself back there years later in a different uniform, doing a different role. That was a slightly different outcome. But it was really good. We would spend days at a time living in the desert off the vehicle, and as a kid, it was everything you dreamed to do as a soldier.
Yeah.
Going back to the pioneers of the SAS, the long range sort of desert patrols that they would do, where everything you need is on the vehicle, and we would live out in the desert for weeks at a time. Really, really good, actually. And the first time for me operating in a hot climate, a desert environment. So yeah, they come back from that, and then the very next year, we got told we were going to Afghanistan. So it was a really good time to join the military, because there was a lot going on.
Yeah.
And that was just the geopolitics at the time of the Iraq invasion in 2003. And then
so Iraq was 2003. When did you join the Paras?
2002.
Okay.
So the battalion had already been to Iraq in 2003, and then went back again in 2005. And it was year on year off deployments at that time for the Telek campaign. So the very first one I missed because I was 17, unfortunately, and the British Army won't allow you to deploy in operations until you turn 18.
Okay.
So it was a really good time to join, because there was a lot going on, and previous the generations before, some of there was sergeant majors that had just done back-to-back tours of Northern Ireland for 20 years. So it was interesting operating in the desert and having those experiences at a young age, really, as a soldier. So we came back from came back from Iraq, and actually got married to a girl I'd been with for a few years. And then the following year, we started hearing rumours of an Afghan deployment. So the British forces had already been to Afghanistan in 2001, 2002, after the planes went into the Twin Towers.
Okay, yeah.
But that was 2 para, and they deployed to Kabul, and I think there might have been a small contingent in Kandahar. The difference in 2006 was it was the very first deployment into the southern part of Afghanistan, which is Helmand province, which was renowned as one of the most lawless places in the world at that time, and a huge stronghold to the Taliban, because it's just a hugely mountainous region.
Yeah.
Before us, the last troops there were actually Russians in the 80s.
I was going to say, because the Russians tried, didn't they? And they lost, didn't they? Or got beaten back out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, there was villages that we were patrolling into, and the locals thought we were Russian. We were the first foreign faces they'd seen since the Russian invasion.
Wow.
Which is just, it's like going back a couple of 100 years. It's just almost medieval like. And yeah, so we started hearing rumours, and for the battalion, I think Iraq was a little bit of an anticlimax, because when you join, you can only hope that you get the opportunity to be a soldier and do everything that you train to do, and go to war and fight the enemy. And although there was elements of that in Iraq, it was a bit disappointing for some of the guys that had been out there a few times. So naturally, we just thought that it was going to be another Iraq deployment. We knew that it was a notoriously stronghold for the Taliban in Helmand, but none of us really anticipated what was to come when we got out there. And so I deployed a couple of months later than the main battalion. Stupid drunken accident downtown. I broke my hand.
Right.
The guys went out there, and then I start to see some of the operations they were involved with in the papers, and you could see they were involved in some quite heavy fighting. So I was desperate to get out there.
I was going to say, how did that feel for you, sat at home?
Yeah, well, fortunately, it was about the first month, because when they first went out there, it was mostly reconnaissance and setting up the camp. And then I thought it's going to be like the first Iraq all over again. I'm going to miss it.
Yeah.
So, but no, luckily I managed to get out there. But I suppose the point is that I was aware what I was going into. I knew that the guys were involved in some heavy fighting out there, and a significant moment really that stuck in my mind was just before I deployed out there. 3 para received their first fatality, and it was a young lad called Damien Jackson, who was shot and killed by the Taliban. And I was given the task of packing away his belongings from his bed space for his mum to come and collect. So it was the first time that a British soldier had been killed for a while, especially in Afghanistan. And so it was quite a significant moment.
That must have been heavy.
Going through his kit, because he was only, I think he was 18 or 19. I think he was 18. So I was going through his belongings and deciding, what his mum would like to keep hold of, and just like his clothing and all his personal things. So it was quite a poignant moment for me. And so I suppose the point was I knew what I was going to, but I was excited. It was what I want. It was what I wanted. It was what I joined the army for. And so I went out there, and then in early July, and almost immediately was deployed out on the ground. So the battalion was stretched really across Helmand, and they'd taken over. The paras had taken over district centres, and they were mostly like police buildings and governors' compounds that they had fought and taken over from the Taliban. And then it was important that we held these places from the Taliban. And so the battalion was stretched. So when I actually got there weren't that many of the battalion in the camp. It was just the people helping maintain the operations on the ground, logistics and intelligence and signalers, and a few of the guys that were rotating back for their R&R leave. So generally, for a 6-month deployment, you'll get 2 weeks where you get to go home for 2 weeks R&R. So I was desperate to get on the ground, and I was told I was going to be going to a place called Sangin. Now, I already knew that Sangin was a place where some of the most intense fighting had happened. So I knew what I was going to, and I was desperate to get out on the ground. So I got to Camp Bastion. I had a couple of days where you acclimatise, you zero your weapons, you'll go through the rules of engagement at that time. So what dictates whether you can fire your weapon or not. And for that deployment, they actually changed the rules of engagement. So previously, we operated on a Northern Ireland type rules of engagement. So unless your life was immediately in danger in that very moment, you can't return fire. So if somebody fires a weapon at you and then turns and runs, you can't return fire because your life in that moment is immediately in danger.
Right.
But they changed that for Afghanistan, and that was, an honestly held belief that that person is about to fire on you, or they are marking territory to launch a mortar attack. If you can positively ID them, you can engage them. So it was conventional warfighting, what we were going into. And so I went to Sangin, and we took over a governor's compound. And where I was, it was quite unique in a sense of you've got this mud compound building with a flat roof that we were semi-fortified with sandbags, and we were to hold it off against the Taliban overrunning it, which they try to do most days. But then we would also put patrols onto the ground to dominate the land, target high-profile Taliban commanders, and just like atmospheric patrols in the area. But Sang is unique in the sense of you've got the governor's compound, and then there's a buffer area around the compound of about half a mile. So as soon as you leave the compound gates, you're like, it's like a sitting duck almost,
right?
Because there's no hard cover. And as a machine guns unit, we had a number of guns on the flat roof, and we had a 360 observation of the ground in front of us, and that would be manned constantly. And then every day or every other day, we would provide a gun team to go out into the heart of Sangin on various counterinsurgency operations, and it was really intense. I spent 50 days there, and there's only a couple of days out of those 50 days where we weren't attacked or they tried to overrun the compound in some way, shape, or form. And that would vary from a missile targeting the building, or all the way up to a full-scale multi-directional attack where we were throwing grenades over the walls to stop them getting into the compound. So it was, it was everything that I hoped for and more.
It's a strange one, Andrew, because sitting here from my perspective, I can understand, like, you've trained so hard to develop the skills to be in that situation. So you want to, I guess, give those skills a run out. But at the same time, I'm sat here thinking that sounds fucking terrifying. Like, I would be thinking, well, I hope they don't. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I hope I don't have to use those skills. Glad I got them. What's that saying? You'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, or something. I've
Yeah.
completely butchered that. But
Yeah.
you know what I'm getting at? Like,
Yeah.
it's to have the skills and not have to use them, to me, would be like ideal. But I guess realistically, as you say, your whole vision of all that training has been to get to that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And my mindset changed throughout those 50 days. When I arrived there, I was so desperate to get involved in a firefight, because it's what you join the military to do. And so many people that had full careers in the military, and they've never fired a round in anger, or they've never been shot at, just through no fault of their own, just because of the way the world is at the time. There's no ongoing operations.
Yeah.
And so I was so desperate to do that. But then there was an old saying in Three Power of be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And my mindset changed completely, because after the first few days, the very first day I arrived, a good friend of mine, on the very first patrol we went out on, was one was shot through his shoulder, another one was shot through his leg, and it shattered his femur and pierced his femoral artery, and he survived. That was day one on the ground. And then, my mindset just slowly changed. And I mean, I'll go into some of the patrols, but there were so many occasions where I should have been killed, and I wasn't. And most of the time, it was just through luck. I developed this kind of more warped mindset of, I just generally didn't think I was going to leave there. I thought that my purpose was to die on that roof. And there was just so many times where that should have happened. So on one occasion, the Taliban used to rely heavily on foreign fighters that would come over from Pakistan or other parts of the world. And they might specialize in firing a multi-barrel rocket launcher, or they might be really well equipped to operate the mortars. And so our standard operating procedure, if we had some form of intelligence that they were going to fire the mortars, or they were going to launch an attack, our standard operating procedure is to man the guns and observe the horizon for the attack. And we would use it was called an ICOM chatter. So we had a radio that would listen into the frequency of the Taliban radios, and then the interpreter would translate what they were communicating. And it was a very bizarre feeling before the mortars, because unlike a conventional attack where it's loud, it's deafening, it's carnage, there's something you're firing at, you're engaged in a fight. When standard 2 of the mortars, you're just sort of waiting, really. You're just waiting. You don't know where to direct your attention. And they would fire them in bunches, and they would adopt a bracketing technique. So in order to get the right trajectory, so the bombs land on your position, they'll fire one maybe beyond the compound. They'll watch the fall of shot, and then they'll adjust it. So they might have one over, one will fall slightly short, and they'll adjust their accuracy until they're bang on target. And you're just waiting. There's nothing to fire at. You can't see anyone, because the range of the mortars are, up to 6 kilometers. And on one occasion, it killed a couple of Royal Irish soldiers that were in a sangha in front of our position. They were very accurate with the mortars. And on one occasion, we were standing to, and a friend of mine, Nick, complete eerie silence. We're waiting for the eruption of a firefight after which used to follow the mortars. And we just hear a thud. And one of the sandbags that's a couple of feet from our face, actually, falls to the ground, and we're on the first floor, man in a gun, looking through the window towards the bazaar, which is like the market area in the centre. And we have a look through the window, and there's an intact 82mm mortar bomb smoking on the ground. So the mortar bomb had actually hit the sandbag in front of our face, and for whatever reason, on that day, it didn't detonate. It was what we call a dud round. Had it detonated, it would have killed everybody in that room easily.
Jeez.
You know,
like, just for the listeners, how big is that bomb?
So an 82 is probably about that size.
So
the actual warhead,
about 45 centimeters.
Yeah,
in width.
And then there's a tail fin on the end that obviously helps guide the bomb. And we looked through it. It was just smoking on the ground.
The damage, had that have detonated, the damage that, I don't know, maybe use this room as an example, like the kill blast, as it were. How much damage would one of those do?
Probably twice the size of this room. The initial blast and the fragments of the bomb. It's a big
old bit of
and then to see it such at close range, just smoking.
So was that then not dangerous, or could that have gone off afterward?
It could have gone off afterwards. So what we did on that occasion was we withdrew out of the first floor to an area of cover, and then the explosive ordnance team from the engineers, they will go there with their robots, and they'll be at a controlled detonation.
Fucking hell, though, mate. So that's like you said, luck, divine intervention, whatever you want to call it. That technically that should have been the end.
And I think so. Nothing actually happened to me, but it was what went in internally, because the more I thought about it, the harder it was to understand why on that one day, on that one occasion.
Yeah.
And there were so many other occasions where, a round has just missed the front of my face by inches, and it's really, your existence is just, it's on a knife's edge. A good friend of mine, luckily the injury was minor, but it was in the middle of a Taliban assault, and it was dark, and quite often they knew where we were, so they'd direct all their fire towards the windows where we were manning the guns, and a load of rounds hit the face of the building. Some of them came into the room we were in, and they'll ricochet around, and it's just pure luck if they hit anybody. And one of the rounds literally passes the front of my face and takes his finger off, and he's firing outside of this window next to me. So it's purely luck. Fortunately, it was just his finger.
You say that. Yeah. I understand in the grand scheme of things, just his finger, but I bet at the time he wasn't thinking just my finger.
Yeah, when I came back, I said it was so hard to remember each individual instance because there were so many.
Yeah.
And I do think on some level I probably tried to suppress it, but I was in such a state of hypervigilance and hyper awareness because your nerves are just as high as they're ever. It's hard to sort of articulate the noise and the carnage and just physiologically how your body reacts to that sort of danger. Just things like time feeling like it slows down. What might be 10 minutes will feel like a couple of hours. Almost silence. The guns were so loud in the compound, but it's almost like you don't hear anything because you're just in a complete state of fight and flight. And the conditions, we'd lost so much weight. We didn't have much food towards the end. The conditions were not nice conditions we were living in. But at the time, I didn't really realise it. You know, you
Yeah.
were just with your mates, looking out for each other, and that was all that mattered, really. Didn't really know much about the political situation in Afghanistan. I just knew that, you know, I was there for him and he was there for me, and that was all really that mattered. Yeah, and then there was another occasion where a good friend of mine, he ended up getting shot through the neck,
I remember
and
listening to that part in your book, mate, and thinking, fucking hell.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was the whole operation was just from start to finish. You know, it was just like something off a film, and
He survived, didn't he, though?
yeah, so yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, Paddy survived, and I have actually asked his permission to mention him in the book. Firstly, so because
Mm.
yeah, because of what happened to him, he's paralysed from the neck down. And before I disclosed any of it in the book, I wanted to make sure that he was comfortable with me talking
Brilliant,
about
mate.
it. But it took years to. I never had the courage to speak to him about it because it was such a raw, feeling and experience. And it's funny, you know, mental health, how your mind sticks on certain details,
Mm.
and for years later, the mind is it's incredible how it sort of regulates things, and things that trigger you. And the thing that triggered me the most was when a friend of when once he was shot, a good friend of mine, Stu, we climbed up onto this flat roof, and where we thought he was dead, and all his blood saturated my sleeves and my hands, and so we evacuated him to the ground. And during this ambush, a somebody came on a quad bike to evacuate him. On the way to get to him, the quad bike is hit by an RPG that doesn't detonate. You know, it was just complete and utter carnage. And because we were still in the middle of the ambush, I just left all of my trauma kit on the ground, on the dirt ground. I still wasn't sure whether he was dead or alive, and we had to go back onto the roof to engage the enemy so that we could aid that withdrawal. But the thing that stuck in my mind was days later, because I didn't have any clothes, I only had one shirt with me. His obviously his blood was absorbed in my cuff in my hands, and years later, even, you know, if I would bite my nails, if I'm stressed or whatever, and I draw blood, the sight of the blood under my nails would take me right back there. And it's such a bizarre thing to happen.
It's not an experience, mate, that the average person, or thankfully, is ever going to have. That's an extreme level of trauma. So yeah, I mean, I remember that part in your book when I listened to that, and it was one, because like I said to you before, I tend to put these audios on and work, and it was one that stopped me. You know, I was working, and it was kind of like a wow kind of moment, you know. So I appreciate you sharing that again, mate. And actually, you know, just to everyone listening to the podcast now, Andy does go into a lot more detail about his tours in the book. So make sure you buy and listen to the book. But yeah, just to put that cheesy little catch in there. And he hasn't asked me to do any of this, by the way. This is just purely me. You know, it's worth listening. It's worth the respect. And these guys that have served in the armed forces, they deserve that respect, to them come and be able to talk about their experiences, and for us all to really realise what it is that these guys put themselves up against to keep our society the way that it is at the moment. So yeah, buy the book. But yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
mate.
But no, I mean, and like I say, my experiences were that of the average para that was out there at that time, and it really, you know, I'm putting the stuff in the book just in the hope that it resonates with somebody else, and they will ask for help like I needed to, but I didn't recognise it
There
in
will be,
myself.
mate. Yeah, there are going to be more people that have been in your position who have seen that and worse. I mean, just to touch on that, I don't want to pry too deeply on it, mate, because I know it's a subject of pain. But because when I hear shot in the neck, and to me, I think, so Afghanistan, I'm thinking machine gun fire or some sort of large rifle fire. How do you get shot in the neck and survive?
Yeah, so it was a miracle that it didn't, that that he survived. It just nicked his spinal column, which is why he is
Right.
paralysed. But it was a single 7.62 AK-47 round, so it's a high velocity round. And the way that it happened was we were that day, that operation, we were in contact with the enemy, so we were being engaged in some way by the enemy. It might be a burst of fire, and then they would run away again, all the way up to, there was points where the Taliban were running into, there was a maze complex of a compound that we were assaulting, and they would fire an RPG down the alleyway and then disappear again, to the point where we were told to fix bayonets to the end of our rifles, which is, it's not a sentence you ever expect that you're going to hear. And it was just because they were so close. They were just
Christ, man, that must
so
be
close.
So when you say, again, I mean, my dad used to be a massive fan of the film Zulu, and that when you say fixed bayonets, that's what comes into my mind, is like that level of.
Yeah,
Christ.
and up until that point, a lot of the engagements were, they were at a distance, you're targeting a firing position, but you'll just see the outline of the Taliban, or them moving around. But on that occasion, it was very up close and personal, to the point where we could hear them talking beyond the compound walls, and we were just sort of navigating our way through the compound, and we were ambushed from a cornfield just outside, and Paddy had got onto a flat roof, and it had a half wall on the roof, and it was important for us to identify where the firing was coming from, so that we can launch an assault, a counter attack. And as he put his head up, he was shot by a round, and we were under sniper fire as well at that time. It was intense. There was an occasion where I saw an Afghan interpreter who was with us. So if we took any prisoner of wars, they would translate for us. And he had lost control of his bladder. He was that scared of the situation that we were in, and he was crying. But like I say, at the time, it's not until after that you sort of reflect
Back
on
on
that.
it.
And don't get me wrong, I put myself in that position, like we all did. I just didn't anticipate the impact that it was going to have on me afterwards. And I do, I know that a lot of that came from childhood traumas as well, that just sort of came together.
Yeah.
Because at the time we were doing, like I say, we were doing the job that we joined to do, but there was just so much happened in such a sustained period of time. It just wasn't normal for the body, physiologically or psychologically, to to go through that. And I just sort of accepted that when it happens, it happens, and I'll die there. And that's where, when I came back, my slightly, thinking back now, I know it was a slightly distorted way of thinking, but I convinced that all the issues that I was having was some form of punishment from a higher being. I don't know, because there's just too many near misses where I shouldn't have came back.
Well, survivor's guilt, mate, is a big thing, isn't it, with people that have been in the armed forces, and particularly, have either seen colleagues or either wounded or killed. So that it's quite a common phenomenon, as it were, to question. I guess when you've been in those extreme circumstances, to question how you've made it back would almost be quite normal.
Yeah, and the thing is, I was only 20, so it was just a lot to. It was a lot to process. It was a lot to. It was not like it was one incident. There was so many, and a lot of it only came out when I started writing the book. And I think what really didn't help was when we eventually withdrew from Afghanistan a few years ago. I just couldn't help but think of all the guys that just in Sangin alone there was I think it was 111 soldiers that were killed there, British soldiers, and we left these places and the Taliban just reoccupied them again, and it was a lot to sacrifice for that to happen, and and that was part of the reason for the book, because some of the young lads there that their life was cut short, they deserved to be remembered and spoken about. So
100%.
That was part of the motivation for putting those stories in the book.
I think it's really important, to be honest, mate. Much the same as talking about mental health, talking about what you've gone through, the sacrifices that you've made and witnessed. It's talking about those things. I mean, quite poignantly, it was Remembrance Day. What day is it? So I'm losing track of days, like a day or two ago. Remembrance Sunday just passed. And, the whole saying there, lest we forget, we will remember them. It's important to talk on these subjects. It's important for people like you to put your books out, because that is how these memories are kept alive, and how, we can pay our respects to the people that have made those sacrifices. Because when we stop talking about them, that is when the memories stop as well. So it's really important, mate. And, for one, I'm really glad that you've written the book, both for you, but just for us as a nation, as a society in general. I wish more people like yourselves, like Nick. Nick's also got his book out. There should be more people writing your books, because what you've been through is exceptional. It is extraordinary. And as I said to you before recording, talking to somebody like you that's just been through what you've detailed, and yet you're sat here today, you've written the book, you're hoping to inspire people and help people and keep memories alive. I don't see how you can't see that as like the resilience. And I know you went through your dark times after you got back, because I've listened to your book, so I'm aware. And we'll touch on that now. We'll discuss how that was. But the fact is that you're sat here today. So you've been through everything that you've been through, and you've come out the other side. And that's testament to the resilience, and it's testament to what you can go through and still come out the other side. Because there'll be people that will listen to this episode today that might be struggling. They might be going through things in their life, and quite possibly not like what you went through. But there will be things, and those things are just as important to people on different levels of pain and trauma that they might have experienced, that could be in a really dark place. And I think speaking to people like you who have been to those places and come back out, that shines the light to people to say, look, stay in there. There is hope. That there is light at the end of the tunnel if you just keep going. Seek support, seek help if you need it, reach out when you need it. But there's always hope.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's probably a good place to lead on to that now, to be honest, Andy, like coming back. First of all, I guess what I want to ask from a personal point of view, seeing all that service, and obviously in the forces, I must have known what you'd been through. What was the support like in the armed forces when you got back? Or was it just like that's what you signed up for?
Yeah, like I said before, it isn't. I don't see myself as a victim. It's just I can only give my my experiences and try and figure out the reason why what happened. I am very grateful, and in a very perverse way, I wouldn't change it. Which is it sounds crazy to say, because because of all the suffering that came afterwards. But I probably wouldn't change it, and I don't even know why that is. It was some of the best and the worst experiences of my life, as it was for all the other hundreds and thousands of soldiers that have been through similar experiences. And so when I came back, I didn't recognize it in myself that something had changed at all. Really, it crept up on me, really, and I think what contributed to that was I had a series of medical problems, and I just couldn't process it in my mind. So not long after I got back, my wife, I had a son, so I was still sort of trying to organize my thoughts, and then I had a newborn baby that had just arrived. And then not long after he was born, I got diagnosed with cancer, and I was only 21, so it was a malignant melanoma, aggressive form of skin cancer.
Was that as a result of where you'd been working?
Yeah, well, they said to me that most likely it would have come from the years spent in Saudi,
Oh, okay.
and there probably wasn't as much of an awareness around skin cancer as there is now. But certainly, all that time in the desert didn't help. And so yeah, I remember the doctor, the dermatologist, telling me that they had the results back, and he told me we don't know how far it's spread, but we have to carry out surgery immediately. And I just found myself again, all these months later, contemplating my own mortality. And in a weird way, I was kind of okay with it. I just kind of accepted it. I thought, well, I've gotten away with it on so many times. It's caught and up on me. It's my time to go. And so many of my friends that were killed at a young age, I just accepted it. It was my time to go. So I had emergency surgery, and luckily they managed to get all of the cancer out of my neck where it was. So two lots of surgery, and then not long after that, I started pissing blood. So I immediately thought, well, the cancer spread to my organs.
Yeah.
Because it's just too much of a coincidence to have all these medical issues all of a sudden. And at the same time, I found myself constantly thinking about Afghanistan, just over and over and over on a repeat cycle in my mind of, could I have done this differently, or that should have happened, or thinking about some of the guys that were killed over there. And then I ended up getting diagnosed with an incurable kidney disease. And they just said to me that there was no known cause for this disease, but at some point I'll have complete renal failure, and I'll need a kidney transplant, or I'll die, essentially. And so I think what I'm getting at is that all these feelings sort of compounded of, making sense of Afghanistan, all the medical issues that I was having, being a father, and then I was drinking really heavily. And I suppose that was, one of the first things I learned, that it's, drinking is not going to solve anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself reminded myself of my own mother, what she used to be like in the drunken, fueled states I've seen her in as a child. But I didn't know what else to do. Because I couldn't quiet the voices in my mind. I was petrified to go to sleep because I'd have horrendous nightmares, but I didn't want to be awake either. So I would just drink until I was just in a completely obliterated state where, and then the other thing was I didn't feel anything. I didn't have any I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel anger. I just felt numb. The only way I could explain it is I just felt numb. My son was born. I didn't feel anything. Didn't feel happy. I just didn't feel angry. I just felt numb, and I was just constantly contemplating dying, really. And then so I started ordering execution videos, which is, I know it sounds a really dark thing to do, but my hope was that if I could watch these horrendous videos, surely I'd feel something. I would feel disgusted, or I'd feel upset or sad.
Mm.
And I would sit and drink in the dark, and I would watch these execution videos when my wife would be in bed all the way through the night. And they were horrendous videos of people being executed in the most horrendous ways. And they're all filmed on homemade cameras. And I ordered them off the internet because I couldn't get them in the UK. And I'd sit and watch every detail, and I didn't feel anything. I just didn't feel anything. It was like my emotions, my ability to regulate emotions were broken. And at the same time, I was being investigated for the kidney disease. And it all came to a head one evening. And I suppose it was inevitable what was going to happen. I started thinking about whether I wanted to be alive at all. I just couldn't shake this feeling of almost like I was in a dream. It was such a bizarre feeling. And I was drinking. And then one night we had some friends over, and I started to shadow box in the kitchen with my sister-in-law. Not shadow box, we were play fighting. So we were play fighting, and we were laughing, we were joking. There was music on. It was although I wasn't myself, it was a happy vibe. But I was desperately sad inside, and it's just so bizarre. She punched me and caught me in the side of my eye, and it stung, that feeling of bone on bone, and it really hurt. And the feeling of that pain triggered an emotional response in me, and it was like months of suppressing these feelings just came out in a wanna. And I just started crying uncontrollably and punching myself in the face. And I mean, it's such a bizarre thing to think about, but I just stood in the middle of the kitchen, punching myself in the face as hard as I could. I was bleeding, and they were just looking at me in absolute shock, as you would be. So I was just crying and hitting myself. And then eventually my brother-in-law runs across the kitchen, and he bear hugs me to stop myself from hurting myself. And I'm just crying and crying. And, I'm just in an absolute state. And it just so happens that we fall against the side of the kitchen table, the kitchen worktop. And I look up and I see the handle of the kitchen knife and the knife block. And I just reach for the knife and just start cutting at my wrists in front of everybody. And it was just, it was like a blooming horror show, and they were just screaming at me to put the knife down. And I did. And I was just upset. And they said, we're going to get you the help that you need. But at that time, I just couldn't see a way out. I just, sorry.
That's all right, man. You take your time.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Andy, don't apologise, man. That's absolutely fine. Take your time.
So, and I was lucky, really, because, because I was still in the army at the time. My wife approached the medical doctor and said, he's not right. And I wasn't right. And I ended up seeing him for 6 months. And one of the first things he got me to do, because I said, I can't remember, all the firefights I was involved with. And and he said, I want you to, from start to finish, I want you to write down everything you remember. Don't worry about the quality of the writing. Don't worry about spelling. Just write it down. And then as I started this process of writing, I kept remembering things. It was almost like my mind's defensive mechanism to forget some of these things, you know, and so I was writing them down, and I also had what we called a contact chart, and it was on a piece of cardboard, and every time the compound was assaulted, I would write on there, roughly how many boxes of ammo. So they were, depending on which weapon system, 50 cal, there's 100 rounds in a box. So I'd write down how many boxes were used, how many mortars were fired, how many people were killed, both on our side or injured, or how many confirmed kills of the Taliban we had. So I had this to look back to, you know, for details, and then it would jog my memory. I was involved in one contact where somebody won a Victoria Cross, which, you know, is the highest possible level of honour that you can receive for, which was Corporal Brian Budd, VC, that was killed in one of the ambushes that we're involved in, and it helped a lot. But it was decided that the best course of action for me was to leave the military, and I agree with that, because the battalion were already gearing up for another deployment back to Afghanistan.
So you were still in the military at that point when you had that moment?
Yes, yeah.
Right, okay.
And I think that helped a lot. But at that time, I didn't know what post-traumatic stress was. I'd never heard of it.
Yeah.
All I knew was how I was feeling, and especially in the paras, I didn't say anything to anybody, not one person. The only person that knew was that night where I was attacking myself. My wife didn't know what to do, so she called the guard room of the camp, and they sent one of the corporals out to me. And as luck would have it, it was a mate of mine, and she should have called the police, really. And they put me on suicide watch, really. And I mean, there was days later where I convinced myself I was going to do it, and there was an occasion where I was lying on the sofa. My wife and my son moved out because she didn't want to be in the same house as me, which is understandable. And the anger was only towards myself. It was only towards myself, and you know, there was another occasion where I planned to do it, and I had the knife there, and I had a bottle of whiskey, and I ended up drinking myself to sleep. And I didn't do it, but
I'm glad that's the case, mate.
Yeah, but so he helped a lot, and I, eternally grateful for the support I received, because it wasn't as well known. And it decided that I was going to leave the military.
Do you know what though, Andy? Again, mate, massive credit for putting it in the book. Massive credit for sitting and talking about it today, because again, there will be people that will listen, and that will help. There will be people in the same position that feel they can't talk to anyone. I mean, I guess what I'd ask you now from that perspective is, if there is anyone listening that is feeling like you have just described, what would you recommend? Like, what would be the first step to seeking help? Like,
I would say that you have to reach out to somebody. You have to talk to somebody, and I understand this from a point of I really struggled talking to people that had not had a similar experience, just because it's so hard to articulate that feeling of feeling like your life's you're gonna immediately end, and so it's going to be different for everybody. But I'd say that if there's someone you're close to, even if you don't know what to say, just say that you're not okay. You don't have to. Sometimes it doesn't. You can't force that conversation out, but you just have to say that you're not okay, and you have to talk to somebody. It's helped me massively putting it down in writing
Mm.
and talking about the experiences. And there's certainly it was a cathartic process writing the book. So I'd speak to somebody. What really helped me was writing it down. So even if you did nothing with it, I would encourage somebody to write it down, not to publish and put it out to the world, because that was never my intention. My intention was when I die, I wanted to give the book to my son, because there was so many things in there that I would never have been able to speak to him about. So I definitely reach out to somebody that is close to you, whether that's a friend, your parents, and then maybe write it down. But we know with mental health, I'd definitely not fully recovered. I'm in a very good place now. I'm absolutely grateful of the second chance of life I had, because not long after, not only a few years ago, my life nearly ended for another time with my kidney disease. So I've lost my train of thought now.
Oh, you're right, mate. You're good. You were saying about mental health.
I went off in a so definitely not. But I know how to manage it now. I know how to manage my triggers, and I know that if I go on a weekend binge drinking and I don't exercise and I eat shit food and I watch, my wife will tell you now, I've got this terrible habit of watching depressing things when I'm feeling low. So I'm not helping myself at all.
Yeah.
But I know to manage those triggers. I know that if I haven't got those things in alignment, I'm not prioritizing sleep, then I'm off to a false start from the beginning. I'm not doing myself any favors. So, sleeping well, staying away from drugs and alcohol, doing some form of exercise is at least gonna help you. I ended up had to take medication to sleep because I couldn't sleep, but I would really stay clear of that if you can. I know it's not the case for everybody, and things do take time. It's not an overnight fix, as we know. But the first step is you need to share that with somebody.
100%, mate. Well, what you've said is one of the points I want to highlight that's really important is that mental health, you never get cured from mental health. Like everybody, you'll live with mental health for your whole life. So will I. So will anybody here or anyone listening. Everybody has mental health. You will have your triggers, your traumas, and then quite rightly what you said, you've got now, you know them, you know your triggers. So then you've got your coping mechanisms, and you've just laid out a few of those: good sleep, exercise, staying away from alcohol. Those are your coping mechanisms to deal with the triggers from the inputs that have made you who you are. And, earlier on in the conversation, you also said you wouldn't change it. And I can resonate with that because I'm the same. I've been through things in my life that haven't been pleasant, but they've made me who I am. They're part of the cake mix, the ingredients that have gone into the bowl that have probably led me to sit here today. If none of that had happened, I don't know who I'd be or what I'd be doing. And it's similar for you. Everything you've been through has made you the person you are now. So in learning those triggers and paying attention, the first step to me with any kind of mental health is acknowledging you have it. The first step is to acknowledge it exists and you have it. And once you acknowledge that you have mental health in the same way you have physical health, the same way that everybody has physical fitness, you have mental fitness. There are people in this world that are fortunate that will go through life with good mental health from birth to death and will never really truly acknowledge the fact that they have mental health because it's never really been rocked. But everyone has it. And quite often with mental health, it's those things that you don't expect, the thing that you're not worrying about, the thing that hasn't even crossed your mind, that phone call that you weren't expecting to tell you that something tragic has happened. That's what will rock your mental health. It'll knock you for six. But I do think it's just really important to acknowledge as a point one that you have mental health. Everyone has mental health. and that everyone's mental health can be affected. Because I'm sat opposite you, mate, thinking if I had been through the experiences you'd been through, I would also need to process that and struggle with some of the things that you've dealt with. So it's perfectly normal and natural. We're all human. One of the amazing things about the mind is how malleable it is. You know, in those moments while you were on active duty, as it were, your mind had to put you in a position where you could deal with that incoming threat there and then, you know, because the alternative to that is what? Curl up in the corner and you know, cry basically, which could then potentially get you killed. So your mind dealt with the situation at the time, but essentially by boxing it away. And then by the sounds of what you've gone through, having that emotional is strange because I'm listening and I'm just putting the dots together. But by the sounds of it, the incident with your sister-in-law and just having that emotional connection cracked the whole thing open for you, and it all just kind of rushed out at once. There's no wonder you couldn't deal with that at that point in time. But it is really good to hear that you've now paid attention to the whole circumstance, and that's had you reflect on it, and you've now moved forwards with your coping mechanisms, with knowing your triggers, with paying attention to your mental health, and importantly, knowing the things that will cause it to drop. Because none of us are perfect, mate. Like you said, you know, if you go on a bit, we'll all have a weekend where we might go on a binge, or we might lose our sleep, or we might not exercise. But at least you're aware. So you know you're not. One of the biggest problems is when things are going wrong and people don't know, they feel lost, they don't know how to stop it. You know, it's like, well, how do I fix this? And there's no input. At least you know, I'm feeling like shit today, but I know I haven't slept, and I know I've been on the piss for 2 days, and I know, so you can then adjust that to pull yourself back out of it. And that's what I'd recommend to anyone that's struggling, is just examine your circumstances, examine your life, and just have a look at those things. You know, have you been on a bender for 3-4 days? Maybe that's why you're feeling shit. You know, try and adjust the little things, like get off the drink, get off the drugs, go and get some exercise, go for a walk, get some fresh air, try and get a good night's sleep. And then, you know, if you're feeling really low and really dark, like you can't go on right now, adjust those little things first, then see how you feel. Try and get a good night's sleep. I know it's easier said than done, but then see how you feel tomorrow. Do you feel a bit better? Well, what else can we do? Maybe go for a walk and then combine that with a good night's sleep. Maybe don't have a drink today. You know, and it's all those things, mate. And I just wanted to sort of highlight what you were saying, because it can truly make a difference to men in particular that are struggling.
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like I'm a better person for it. Definitely more resilient. Although there's obviously some things from the past that are still quite raw. I'm a more compassionate, empathetic, resilient person for it. And like you said, it's just part of your makeup, and it you know makes me who I am today, which I'd like to think is, you know, more of a well-rounded person that you know I can hopefully help somebody who's going through something similar. So yeah, you learn a lot about yourself, and as you get older as well, I think you just know yourself better, don't you?
Yeah,
and everybody's different. And going back to what we were saying at the start, I having a sense of purpose as well once I left, focusing on something else. I think that helped bridge the gap into transitioning into the civilian world, as it were.
But you didn't go straight. Well, I say you didn't go straight into the civilian world. I guess, is it still classed as civilian, the private that side of things?
Yeah. Well, so so it was early 2007. So I probably had in total about a year to a year and a half of resettlement period. So I opted to go and do a close protection course in Hereford, which at the time was one of the most reputable, can't say the word,
reputable
courses at the time. and it was 3 or 4 months long. And at the same time, I was still checking in with the psychologist, and it helped a lot because I had this new sort of sense of purpose now and what I wanted to do. So it was a year to a year and a half, and then at the same time I was applying for different jobs in preparation for when I left. So I was looking at the prison service, and I was looking at the Metropolitan Police, and I also applied for the security services. And I didn't really think anything of it, and I managed to pass each phase of the assessment process for the role that I was applying for, and ended up spending 2 years in London with the security services.
When you say security services,
MI5.
oh, fucking right, okay,
Yeah. So I just thought, I left school with no qualifications.
I'll be direct here, mate. Are we talking like as a spy? Because you're here at MI5, mate. I'm just like James Bond spy stuff.
Yeah, well, like any organisation, there are I need to think how word this, but there are a variety of different roles that you can do depending what you're applying to do, and some of them you need a certain level of education to apply for. So I really adopted the same mindset that I had when I joined the Paras. I was completely obsessive over the application process, down to starting with the written assessment. There's a series of cognitive and behavioural assessments that you do, and then depending what line of work you go in, it varies the process. And yeah, so I was offered a full-time position in a mill bank in Whitehall, and I was there for a few years. So and it was really good. It was fascinating, but the type of work I wanted to go into, it was a minimum degree entry level, which I didn't have.
Okay.
So I started studying towards it while I was still serving, and it wasn't out of my grasp, but it was a case of time and money. And at this time, so this is 2009, 2010, the UK withdrew from Iraq, and we started seeing the emergence of insurgent groups in Iraq, and the close protection industry was goldmined for private security industries. And I knew lads all across the world that I served with that were working in Africa, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and this was just before the Arab Spring as well. So there was an opportunity there to earn some really good money and do something exciting and meaningful. So against everybody's advice, I decided I was going to quit. I was going to leave. I know it was only my sister and my brother knew what the sort of work I was involved with. And so initially I worked directly for a Russian family as a bodyguard. So it was in London. A friend of mine who was a Kurdish translator put me in touch with somebody, and I worked directly for the family. And it was it didn't scratch the itch that I was hoping that it would. So it was mostly UK based and a few other parts of Europe, and we would look after the family and the children. But at this time, I had friends that were working in the Middle East, and they were earning a lot of money working on armed convoys. So I decided that's what I wanted to do. I could see a career in that line of work, and to be honest, it was the one thing that I was good at. It was the only thing I knew, really. And the couple of years I had there helped me later on when I come back from the Middle East, and I started working more UK and Europe.
Armed convoys, mate. Explain that one to me. When you like, is that just from place to place?
Yeah, so you'd have we looked after American clients. So the company I applied to join, they had their own internal selection process.
Mm.
So essentially, you're doing another course, and they would cherry pick the guys that they wanted to offer full-time jobs. And so the convoys were armored Land Cruisers, and our clients were mostly American.
Mm.
And we would transport them armed from A to B around Iraq with so we'd have local national drivers, so Iraqi drivers, an interpreter, and we would plan out the route. We'd facilitate the meeting. At that time, there was still a significant threat from IEDs, and armed convoys were being targeted by insurgents groups. So, we would just transport from A to B and just look after them while they're in country.
Yeah.
So I went out and did that on a rotation of initially it was 2 months in country and then a month off, and it was great. I mean, it was basically a continuation of being in the military, but it wasn't the same level of fighting that was involved with in Afghanistan. We were essentially an armed convoy escorting people, but it was a very precarious time in Iraq, because you start to see the emergence of ISIS. There was ISIS cells operating in Iraq, as well as other insurgents groups.
See, am I right in thinking that ISIS are like, or were, or are a more extreme form of the Taliban?
Yeah, well, they are completely different, but they are more extreme in their belief system and their interpretation of the faith. And then there's Al Qaeda as well, which is different again.
Right.
So the emergence of ISIS really came from the UK and the coalition forces' occupation of Iraq, because there were a lot of extremist views, mostly from Sunni Muslim groups. And when Saddam was no longer in power, it just left a vacuum of various groups forming with their own political and sectarian views. So it was a perfect time for them to grow and expand their ideology, really. And so it was a good time to be involved in close protection, and the money was really good, and it was a job that I knew how to do, and I was back mixing with paras and Marines, and it was a similar sort of similar role, I suppose. So I spent 4 years in Iraq, or just doing that sort of that system, and it was great. I felt quite comfortable doing that, and I thought that's what I would do for the rest of my career, really. But the security industry is saturated, and the very good jobs, the working as a freelance consultant jobs, are hard to come by, or it's highly competitive. Mostly former SF special forces guys would do it, or those that have been in the industry a long time. And at this time, I still had my kidney disease, so every 3 to 4 months, I'd have an appointment with the renal clinic, and they would do a full blood count. They occasionally they would take a kidney biopsy, and they would monitor the damage to my kidneys. And the nature of the disease, it's called IgA nephropathy. So it's the same disease that Tina Turner died of. Jonah Lomu, the rugby player, it's the same one that they died of.
Wow.
And they said to me that I can live with this disease for 20 years, or it could deteriorate in a matter of weeks. It's just a case of monitoring. There's no known cure for it. And the only symptom that I had was high blood pressure,
Mm.
and that would fluctuate. So yeah, fast forward to 2014, I met my wife, who I'm with now, and I decided that I didn't want to be overseas for so many months of the year because I was a non-UK resident. I had a villa in Thailand and Karinya, which is the Turkish side of Cyprus.
Okay.
So I'd split my annual leave between there and working and visiting the UK. And then I met my wife, and I decided that I wanted to come back to the UK because just away from home all the time. But I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. I'd never really applied for a normal job before, and I through a friend of mine, an ex-One Para friend, he was involved in crisis management and security consultancy. So we would run courses for people that wanted to go into areas of conflict. And quite often the courses would be run in country. So during the Syrian uprising and the Syrian war, we deployed to Syria, and we would run a 2-week course for freelance journalists. And it would involve things like pre-hospital trauma care, weapons awareness, so the capabilities of different weapon systems, situational awareness, all things that are going to help to keep them safe when they're deployed out on the ground. But the clients varied from NGOs, journalists, government agencies. We taught counter-surveillance courses, surveillance courses, and it was really good work. But I was based in the UK, but I was freelancing, so constantly chasing work, which it's hard to do because you don't know what you're going to be doing from one month to the next, and you've always got to be on the end of a phone, as I'm sure you will know.
Well, I was going to say, mate, this is sounding more and more like the trades, but yeah.
And I found it stressful, with having a mortgage, and but it was really interesting. I had some really good jobs. I did a lot of surveillance work in the UK for different companies, anything from matrimonial cases where the
really? That
partner
kind of
might think
thing.
the person's cheating, to corporate espionage of an organisation stealing data on or information on another business. All manner of types of surveillance and tracking, and some interesting undercover jobs as well out in the Far East. So, and I was very comfortable doing that. I loved the work. I had a good network of people that I could go to for different types of work or media work. One of the last ones that I was involved with was when Iraqi security forces and the Peshmerga Kurdish fighters, they retook Mosul in northern Iraq back from ISIS, and this was in 2016. So 2 years previously, ISIS walked through Mosul. So it's Iraq's second biggest city, relatively unchallenged, and they declared Mosul and parts of Syria their caliphate, and they occupied it for 2 years. And then 2016, there was a big joint coalition, an Iraqi security force effort to retake back the city. And I had the opportunity to go with a news team as an advisor. And it was it's a historical moment, really, especially from a sort of military history buff like myself. And we would be one bound behind. So the day previously, the Peshmerga would go in, clear a village, kill a load of ISIS fighters, take a load hostage, or prisoners of wars, and then we would go the next morning and report on the village and speak to the locals. We'd visit the hospitals. We'd visit the IDP camps, so displaced people that just no longer have homes. It was fascinating. But I come back from that, and my kidneys failed. So over the course of a few weeks, my kidneys just rapidly deteriorated.
Fucking hell, mate! I tell you, like, yeah, you. No wonder you wrote a book. Like
Yeah.
you've had a hell of a life.
But and it was strange because it's not like a physical injury because my kidneys weren't working. Your body is poisoning itself from the inside, so your kidneys are no longer filtering your blood of dangerous toxins, and it all accumulated in I basically soiled myself and passed out at home. I was rushed to hospital, and they put me in an induced coma and put me on like life-saving hemodialysis. And they couldn't believe how I was still alive because of the levels of toxins in my blood. So, like potassium, for example, if that is in elevated levels in your blood, it can cause a sudden cardiac arrest. Any mineral deficiency. And towards that point, like you no longer go to the toilet anymore. Your body's slowly shutting down. It was difficult to accept because mentally I was okay, but my body was just slowly giving way. And they fed a tube into the artery into my heart directly from my neck and in my groin. And I spent like 2 or 3 weeks in intensive care, and then started on dialysis to stay alive. I had to be on dialysis to stay alive, and that lasted for I think it was like 7 or 8 months, whilst I was on the kidney transplant register. And then in a really strange set of circumstances, how it's just a good example of how life comes full circle. Out of all the people in the world, my sister wanted to give me a kidney to save my life. So and she was the perfect match as well. I think all them years ago she sacrificed her whole childhood to raise me as her own. And then all these years later, in 2017, she gave me a kidney and saved my life. And
oh wow, mate, that's incredible.
Yeah, and it's not really a conversation you ever think you'll have to have with a family member. And I would never ask, for a kidney, yeah. But she was, like she was all them years ago with my dad. She was adamant that's what she was going to do, and I didn't have a say in it really. And I asked her to consider the fact that she's got 2 children of her own, that, they might need a donation. I don't know, but she donated a kidney, and within a week of the transplant, I was out of the hospital and given another chance at life.
Wow.
But yeah, it's incredible the surgeons, what they do.
And to ask the question, the kidney disease that you had, that won't translate to the new kidney?
No, well, they said they can't conclusively say that it won't because there's no known cause.
Right.
So I attend the renal clinic twice a year, and I have a full MOT, and I've touch wood, I've been a clean bill of health ever since. This is 7 years ago.
Mate, I mean, not that I'm any authority on it, but from where I'm sitting, I think you've been through enough trials and tribulations to get some good luck and just be fucking okay now,
But yeah, it's incredible. Like I said, once again, I thought this is my time, and it's just because it feels like you have a really bad hangover. That's how it feels with your blood being poisoned, which is what's happening. And then as soon as I woke up, I felt it sounds a bit cliche, but almost like reborn. I felt like I was 10 years younger.
Yeah.
And then, I was then determined to get back to be, I thought I've had another chance here, so I want to be fighting fit and make the most of this. 3 months to the day of my transplant, a load of friends of mine, one of them, he was shot in the leg. Horrendous story, really. He was sleeping in one of the Afghan compounds, and a corrupt rogue Afghan policeman came into the room with a machine gun, sprayed the room. One of the lads died. He survived, but he had a hole in his leg that you can put your fist into. And at 3 months to the day, we ran a half marathon for a mental health charity, just to raise money and awareness for veterans and mental health. But and then that was 3 months, 2017, and then the following year I became an operational firefighter. So I obviously had to disclose my transplant, but the thing is, I'm physically fit. It doesn't impact me in any way, shape, or form now. So and it's been the best decision I made, really, because still get that level of excitement and the occasional adrenaline rush, but I like the I know I like there's a routine to it. There's no I understand that my days of traveling to the Middle East are probably behind me now. But it's a really good.
You feel at home in the fire service.
Yeah, and I work with a really good bunch of people, and there's so many similarities to being in the army, because we hang out outside of work, we experience things that are out of the ordinary for your average person a lot of the time, as well as your mundane like your bin fires and your and emergency services as well. There's a lot of there is definitely a need for people to talk about mental health.
Yeah, gotcha.
And there's it's different to the military. It is completely different, but it definitely needs talking about.
Definitely, mate. I mean, I would imagine as a fireman, I think everyone's got a bit of a romanticised vision of a fireman. I always think of rescuing a child from a burning building or a cat from a tree. But the reality is you guys have to attend a lot of RTAs, and you're going to see some pretty horrific things in that line of work as well. So there's still, perhaps you're maybe even better equipped to deal with it because of your background. But anyone in that service, whether it's the fire service, the ambulance service, the police, all of those services are going to see the best and worst of humanity, really, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, the trauma side of things has never. Well, I say it doesn't really bother me as much, or I don't think it does. But I do feel I'm in a better position to look out for those signs and symptoms in other people. But yeah, you're right. There's a big side of the job is the rescue, and we'll support paramedics and police gaining entry into buildings where someone may have died from an overdose. If someone has if there's a suicide, we will go if we need to cut them down, really? As well as your bread and butter flat fires and road traffic collisions, all sorts of things. So,
do you work city centre, don't you? You said.
Yes, yeah.
Manchester City Centre.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced a totally different sort of topic, really? But I've heard of emergency services being targeted and attacked and things like that. Have you ever come across that?
Yeah. So fortunately for the fire service, I can only speak for Manchester, is they're only around the period of bonfire night.
Right.
For some reason, we've become a target. the majority of the time, the rest of the year, we're kind of looked on favourably compared to the police who put up with a lot, especially the sort of outer city estates surrounding Manchester. So we're very lucky in that sense. But it's a very rewarding job, and I wouldn't change it. I'd recommend it to anybody.
Again, mate, it's a very noble job, and there's a pattern I think that I've noticed through what you've said in terms of having that camaraderie, the brotherhood, as it were, and you've gone from the armed forces to now like what you're doing with the fire service, and even with the close protection, the same thing, isn't it? Really, you've had that camaraderie, that team sort of around you. So I'm glad you found that, to be fair, because I think, not that I know you beyond today, but the fire service sounds like a great fit for you. Yeah. Is that where you see you long term now, like settled?
Yeah, I mean, I will continue to, anybody that will give me a platform to try and help or talk about my own experiences in some way. Like I said at the start, my experiences aren't special; they're just unique to me.
I think they are, mate. I think you're underselling yourself there, Andy. You've got a whole combination of things that you've had to deal with and process there. So don't undersell it, mate. Your experiences are unique. They are special. They're certainly worth talking about. And, they're entertaining to listen to. I'll be honest. It is entertaining because I think for most blokes, mate, most young lads, when we grow up, we play army, and we all sort of fantasize about that army life, and you've been there and lived it. So there's always going to be that fascination with these kind of stories. But the side of it that you bring in, talking about, you haven't over glorified it. You've told it matter of factly, this is what happened, and this is where I struggled, and this is where it hurt me, and this is how bad it got, and this is how I got out of that. And I think that, mate, it's so commendable. And I thank you for being as open as you have been in the book and as open as you have been today, because it's that openness that will make a difference and will help other people in the armed forces, or the people outside the armed forces, just know that it's okay to open up and talk.
Yeah, thank you, mate. I appreciate, like I say, you give me the platform to have a conversation with you.
All day long, mate. Honestly, I'm honoured to have you sat in here today. It really has been and is an honour to be able to provide this platform to people such as yourself, because the thing I love about doing this podcast is that everybody that sat in that chair, not in this environment, first time here, but everybody that sat opposite me and had these conversations, it's always for the same purpose. It's because you've been through something and you've recognised that what you've been through can help others. And on that, we're all on the same page, you know. So it's, I mean, mate, your life's been incredible. I'll be honest with you, that there's so many things to unpack there with what you've been through. And, I'm sure everyone listening will feel the same. As I've said before, if you want to know more, that there is more detail in Andy's book. So go and check out the book. You won't be disappointed. Is there anything we haven't spoken about that you wanted to discuss before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I don't think this whole the journey of publishing the book. It was for my son. It was for my son, and it was for some of the young lads that didn't come home. That was the primary goal. So I didn't really think much beyond that. It's only since publishing it that friends that I serve with, that I have an immense amount of respect for, have reached out to me privately, and they might have said, so much of what I've talked about resonates with their own experience, but I didn't know it at the time. Yeah. So, that's why I'll continue to be an advocate for mental health, and just hope that by allowing myself to be vulnerable and talk about my own experiences, it might help somebody else, and not just veterans, anybody.
Yeah, 100%, mate. But veterans is a key demographic that does need that help. So keep being that shining light for that. Just before we do wrap things up, then, if you want to give all your details. So where can people find you if they want to connect with you, and also where can they find and buy the book?
Yeah, so I'm on social media, mostly Instagram, but there's TikTok and Twitter, and it's all Beyond the Drop Zone is the handle. Obviously, the title of the book. The book's available on Amazon. You can buy it as an ebook, Audible, paperback, hardback. There's all different formats. And I'm more than happy to speak to anyone offline, or if anybody wants to message me away from this, then I'm an open book. If I can help in some way, that I will.
Appreciate that, mate. Thank you. I'll put all of Andy's details and the link to find the book in the episode description. So if you're listening now, scroll down wherever you're listening. His details will be there. You'll be able to find him and connect. Mate, absolute pleasure talking to you today. Again, massive thanks for taking time out your day to come down here and share that. I'm sure there'll be people out there that will resonate. So really appreciate it, mate. Thank you. And just keep doing what you're doing. And to you guys out there listening, thank you very much for listening. As usual, please like, follow, share, subscribe, all of that beggy stuff. Helps get the message out to more people. And we'll catch you soon on the next one. Thank you.